and hello. We are going to be talking about nutrients involved in the body defense today. And so we're going to start out talking about the immune system. And of course, the immune system is made up of a lot of different parts of the body. So you have the skin, and of course that helps obviously to keep invaders out. And then you have intestinal cells, white blood cells, and then you also have what's called your lymphoid tissue, and they're going to all work together in order to keep us from actually getting infection in the body, or to also to prevent aging cells and dying cells from breaking down and causing issues in the body. And then they also remove abnormal cells from the body as well. So parts of the immune system, of course, are going to include the lymphatic system. That's one major part. And if you see in this picture here, you can see you have what we call lymph nodes. And tonsils and adenoids, these are considered lymph nodes as well. They just get special names, just like the appendix is a major lymph node, but it also gets its own special name. These lymph nodes are like filters. And so what happens is fluid that was originally circulating around in your bloodstream ends up eventually making it into a parallel system of tubes, which is the lymphatic system. So wherever you have blood capillaries, for instance, paralleling those blood capillaries are going to be lymphatic capillaries. So when the fluid leaves your blood and then enters into the lymphatic system, that fluid is going to make its way through those lymph nodes. And those nodes are full of various different types of cells that help to rid our body of these invaders. Or it also helps to rid our body of things like cells that have gone through mitosis or division, and when they went through that division, they didn't divide appropriately, and therefore they are now considered a cancer cell. And so these things can all be filtered out through those lymph nodes, through the lymphatic system. And then you have other things too, like you have the thymus and the spleen and the bone marrow, and these are all helping to produce particular types of cells that are part of the immune system. For instance, what we would call T cells and B cells. Now, the skin is definitely a part of this whole thing, and obviously the skin is a very thick substance or tissue. It's made of what we call the epidermis, which is the outside, what you can see. Then right underneath of that, where all the blood vessels and the nerves and all are, is the dermis. And then under that would be the hypodermis, which is usually our fatty layer. And then below that is muscle. And what the skin is helping to do is it's creating a barrier so that bad guys can't get in, but then also you don't lose a lot of fluid out of the body. And obviously, if there's any type of opening in the skin, then bacteria and bad things can penetrate into the body. And the other big deal is you have to have the right amount of nutrients in order for your skin to be healthy. And those nutrients would include like vitamin A, essential fatty acids, niacin, which is one of our B vitamins, and zinc, which we're going to talk about all of those in just a little bit. So vitamin A deficiency also is going to lower what we call enzyme lysozymes, and those are needed to kill bacteria. Now, intestinal cells are also very important as far as keeping down microorganisms. First of all, one of the things about the cells that line our intestines is they're very closely packed together. And then we also have what are called the gut-associated lymphoid tissues, and these are going to assist our gastrointestinal system in keeping pathogens from entering into the bloodstream. And then we have nutrient deficiencies, which can cause intestinal cells to break down. We may have excess diarrhea, bacteria that enters into the bloodstream, and so on. And so, of course, we have to have adequate protein ingestion, vitamin A, B6, B12, C, folate, which is vitamin B9, and zinc. White blood cells are going to be there to help to attack microorganisms that enter into our bloodstream, especially phagocytes. Now, phagocytes, they kind of act like little Pac-Men, and they swim around the bloodstream, they get into the tissues, and they're able to engulf and then ingest and digest these microorganisms. So if you're looking here, this is the phagocyte, and let's say this is a bacteria. So it goes around and it eats up those bacteria. When those bacteria enter into the phagocyte, they're going to attach to these lysosomes that release a whole bunch of digestive enzymes and break down these bacteria to get rid of them out of our system. And this whole process is called phagocytosis. So we talked about the thymus just a little bit, and the thymus, along with the bone marrow, helps to mature white blood cells, such as our T cells, what we would call like cytotoxic T cells, helper T cells, and then even what are called memory cells. These are all important in our immune defense. And the thymus, which is much more active the younger we are in life. So we have a much larger thymus, more active thymus in infancy, and then as we get older, the thymus gets smaller, and it also tapers off in how active it is. The spleen, it contains a lot of macrophage, and we talked about what they're able to do in helping the body already. Now, we have what's called the innate immune system, and then we also have the adaptive immune system. Now, innate can also be called nonspecific. The adaptive is the specific immune system. And the nonspecific or innate immune system, this is the immune system that we're born with. And so basically, this is like the physical barrier immune system. So your skin is a good example of your innate immune system. Your specific or adaptive immune system is what helps to develop over time, especially after you've been exposed to certain pathogens. You get those memory cells. Your T cells and your B cells are able to fight off these pathogens after they've better developed with time. Another thing about the nonspecific or innate immune system is that it also assists in what we call the inflammatory response, okay? So the inflammatory response is going to be where you have some type of foreign substance. I mean, it could be a splinter, it could be a bacteria, something that invades the body. And then what happens is you have histamine released, and that histamine is going to cause blood vessels to vasodilate. So you're going to see from that edema, redness, you're going to see heat, and eventually you may even see pus in there as well. All of that inflammation is supposed to protect the body. However, here's the real issue, is that Americans have a lot of chronic inflammation, this kind of chronic low-level inflammatory response. And we now know that this is linked to many different ailments, and it is due to nutrition problems. And this chronic inflammation, for instance, is the major cause of cardiovascular disease. This chronic inflammation leads to autoimmune diseases, and it's due to the high levels of refined carbohydrates that Americans eat. And we eat a lot of sugary substances. So when I talk about refined carbohydrates, really what I'm talking about are more packaged foods, not homemade things. And these can really promote inflammation. Fruits, vegetables, grains, those are going to lower the inflammatory response and lower your risk of chronic diseases. The specific immune system, or the adaptive immunity, is all about lymphocytes. So these are the B cells, the T cells, the memory cells. Now, B cells are responsible for producing antibodies. And antibodies basically are proteins that are going to be released in the bloodstream, and they're able to bind up and prevent pathogens from creating problems. T cells are going to be able to destroy cells in our body that have been invaded by these pathogens. The pathogens take over these cells, and then they try to get the cells to reproduce more of that virus, let's say, that's invaded the body. Now, once the pathogen has been eradicated out of the body, the next thing that happens is the body creates memory cells. And these cells are able to remember that pathogen so that if it invades the body again, it's able to have a much more rapid response. And if our lymphocytes could have a more rapid response, if those T cells could respond quickly instead of on average taking about 2 weeks to respond to an invader, then we wouldn't have all the symptoms that that pathogen would create in the body. So, of course, the important thing for this class is what are the nutrients that help us to have a strong, steady immune system, okay? And a big deal would be your B vitamins, and then, of course, proteins and iron. So proteins supply the building blocks we need in order to make the tissues that support the immune system, to make the enzymes that help to make things in the immune system. The B vitamins are there for a couple of different things. One of those is, for instance, vitamin B6. It's involved in amino acid metabolism, allows us to make more of those proteins for the cell. Vitamin B9, which is folate, and vitamin B12, along with iron, are all necessary to be able to produce or synthesize DNA. And of course, we need all of those to be able to make more immune cells to fight off this pathogen. Now, the different minerals we need to help destroy the pathogens would be like zinc and copper. Now, zinc and copper are both very important in the formation of white blood cells. Iron and zinc are also going to help to produce enzymes that are used by our white blood cells to destroy the pathogens. Vitamins A and D are helping regulate gene expression, and that means that vitamin A and D are able to bond to DNA and switch on and switch off particular genes. Now, vitamin D has really been studied as far as its effect on the immune system. And it's kind of interesting because vitamin A and vitamin D, along with E and K, are all what we would call fat-soluble vitamins. That means that these vitamins can dissolve in fat, and they can actually get into the fat of our body. And then vitamins B and C are the vitamins, and but all of the B vitamins and C are the vitamins that are what we would refer to as water-soluble vitamins, okay? Now, vitamin D, being a fat-soluble vitamin, it's kind of interesting because its big control in the immune system has put it in the limelight, you might say, and as far as science is concerned, and a lot of scientists would like to rename vitamin D and not actually call it a vitamin at all, but actually call it a steroid hormone because of its control on the immune system. So vitamin D is its ability to limit the action of certain white blood cells. And it can also, if you have a decrease enough in vitamin D, it increases your risk of autoimmune diseases. So if I have a good level of vitamin D, I have a less likely risk for autoimmune diseases. And it's also thought that for some people, vitamin D, raising it may also decrease you actually having an autoimmune disease. All right, so we're going to talk about antioxidant nutrients that protect the immune cells, such as vitamin C, vitamin E, and selenium. And this has to do with what are called antioxidant capabilities. And so what the antioxidant is doing is it protects the immune system from being damaged by oxidation reactions. And these oxidation reactions are used to destroy any type of pathogen that gets into the body. White blood cells use oxidation to kill the pathogens. However, one of the issues is that in killing the pathogen, it can also cause issues in the body, which we're going to talk about. And then it helps to regulate the expression of proteins involved in the immune system. That's something else that vitamin C, E, and selenium also do. So there's just a couple pages of lists here that allows you to take a look at what each of these different vitamins are doing as far as their role in the immune system is concerned, as well as some of the other nutrients like zinc and iron and copper. Okay, so let's just talk about an atom for a minute so that we can talk about free radicals and oxidation, all that kind of good stuff. So you know when we're talking about atoms that atoms have a nucleus, and in the nucleus we are going to find protons and neutrons, and then circling around the nucleus, like circling around an orbit, we're going to have electrons. So protons are positively charged, neutrons are neutral, and then electrons are negatively charged. And so in an atom, the number of protons, the number of electrons have to equal each other so that atoms have an overall zero charge. Now, atoms want to be able to bond to each other. And in order to be able to bond to each other, this is all about electrons. So if you remember from chemistry, the outermost orbit or the outermost shell has to have electrons that are not paired up in that atom in order to be able to bond to or to share with, be a part of another atom. So there's going to be an unequal number of electrons in that outermost orbit. Now, oxidative stress is an imbalance between the production of certain types of compounds and the body's ability to protect a bit against the reactions that are occurring, okay? So we're going to talk about all of that, so just bear with me for a few minutes. Reduction is where we're going to gain negative electrons in an atom. Oxidation is loss of negatively charged electrons. And so sharing of electrons in the outer shell makes bonds between those atoms, and oxidation of these bonds produces stable compounds. So free radicals, something else you need to know about before we get into all this talking about oxidation. Unstable atoms with unpaired electrons in its outermost shell is called a free radical. So a weak bond between atoms produces possible molecules with unpaired electrons in its outermost shell. And overproduction of these types of molecules, of these free radicals, can be harmful to the healthy cell. So if we're looking at here, this is the electron transferred between molecules in an oxidation reduction reaction. So here you have two electrons from molecule A, and they're being transferred to molecule B. So because molecule A has lost two electrons, it has been oxidized. Because molecule B has gained two electrons, it has become reduced, okay? So the body has two defense mechanisms to protect itself against free radicals, and that is the enzyme systems and antioxidant chemicals. And they're going to work together to help to limit the free radicals in the body. So enzyme activity, when they're working, they're going to need cofactors. And a lot of enzymes cannot do their job. They can't speed up chemical reactions unless particular minerals are attached. So selenium, manganese, zinc, iron, copper, these are some of the most widely used minerals to attach to enzymes, what we would call cofactors. Antioxidant enzymes would include some enzymes, just for example, called superoxide dismutase, glutathione peroxidase, and catalase. These are big antioxidant enzymes. Now, we can also consume or eat antioxidants that are going to help us to fight against these free radicals. And these types of food substances are going to help to decrease the effects of these free radicals, and they have the ability, some of them, to even repair the damage caused by this oxidation. So, big damage from free radicals would be you have this free radical that is floating around in the cell, And one of the things that we see from this is that these free radicals have a lot of energy. So as those free radicals are moving through the cell and enter into the nucleus, they can damage the DNA. And that kind of damage causes mutations and leads to cancers and other things. If you have some kind of antioxidant, which the antioxidant, we'll talk about this again, helps to change the number of electrons of this free radical and lowers the free radical's energy levels so that it can no longer damage the DNA. So dietary guidelines recommend that we consume a lot of fruits and vegetables in a day and increase our fiber, our vitamins, our minerals, and phytochemicals. If you remember, these are the chemicals that are found mainly in vegetables, but also in some fruits. And that fruits and vegetables have very high levels of defense that helps us against free radicals. So, how these antioxidants are able to stabilize free radicals is by donating electrons. So for instance, remember, a free radical is going to be a chemical or a compound that doesn't have the right number of electrons in its outermost orbit. So if I have some kind of antioxidant, what that antioxidant can do then is donate its electron to my free radical and then stabilize that free radical. The antioxidant is missing an electron. It's become oxidized, but it is not damaging to other compounds. Okay, so that's a good thing. All right, so let's talk about vitamin A and its help as far as nutrition is concerned with the immune system. Again, this is a fat-soluble vitamin. 90% of it's stored in the liver. 10% is stored in the kidneys, the lungs, and adipose tissue or fat. There's three major forms of vitamin A, and one is retinol. One is retinol, one is retinol, and one is retinoic acid. And they exist only in animal products, and in supplements, vitamin A is usually retinol acetate or retinol palmitate. And so plants contain pigments called carotenoids. So we're going to talk about carotenoids. They are a substance from vitamin A. Carotenoids are phytochemicals, and they're a precursor of vitamin A. So we have three carotenoids that are provitamins that can turn into vitamin A. You have beta-carotene, alpha-carotene, and beta-cryptoxanthine. And then other carotenoids that may have health benefits would be lycopene, zeaxanthine, and lutein. And maybe you've heard of some of those. They talk about lycopene and lutein in commercials about different products. So the retinoids, again, are retinol, and retinoic acid. And then you have alpha-carotene, beta-carotene, and gamma-carotene. These are the forms that are found in food. One of the things that vitamin A is going to help us with are epithelial cells. And epithelial cells are cells that line things. So they line the external surfaces of the body, they line the internal surfaces of the body, and they line the lumen or the hole inside organs. And of course, this is a very important barrier we've talked about, helping us with our immune system. Retinoic acid is required in order to form epithelial cells and allow them to develop into mature functioning cells. And vitamin A also supports T lymphocytes. So vitamin A deficiency is not good because one of the things we see is that mucus-forming cells have a tendency to deteriorate, they don't function appropriately, and especially for the eyes, this can lead to dry eyes and blindness. We can also get what's called hyperkeratosis, which the skin cells are going to start to produce too much keratin, and that excess keratin gives us kind of a skin that looks like goose pimples or goose flesh, where all the ends of our hair follicles get stuffed with keratin, and they just kind of stand up underneath the skin, and sometimes people will call that like a toad-like appearance because the skin gets so hard and dry. Some of the functions of vitamin A would also be, which we'll talk about, it prevents night blindness, it prevents the dry eyes or xerophthalmia, it maintains healthy epithelial cells, it's going to help with growth and reproduction, cardiovascular disease prevention, and even cancer prevention. So another issue is blindness due to a vitamin A deficiency, and this is a worldwide phenomena. 1/3 of children suffer from this deficiency, and hundreds of thousands become blind each year. And so the real big deal is the xerophthalmia, where the cornea starts to harden because of too much keratin, and this leads to drying of the cornea, drying of the surface of the eye, and that can cause blindness, and it's a very common problem in Southeast Asia. Now, night blindness is also from a vitamin A deficiency, and people lose their ability to see under low light conditions. There can also be maternal night blindness, and this is a big issue in developing nations because of low levels of vitamin A during pregnancy. But screening and supplementing, very effective in treating and preventing night blindness. Now, vitamin A, what it is doing is it is helping to produce the visual pigment called rhodopsin. And you need rhodopsin in order to be able to see at nighttime. So light's going to enter the cornea, it's going to hit the retina, and then light reacts with rhodopsin, and the rhodopsin is what we call bleached. And that is what actually helps to send out a series of events that allows the brain to be stimulated. And a new vitamin A molecule then combines with opsin to be able to replenish and reform the rhodopsin again. So if you don't have that vitamin A or the retinol, which is what we're using in this case, you're not able to form this visual pigment or rhodopsin. So follicular hyperkeratosis is what we call that excess buildup of keratin, where you get that in the follicles, and then you get that bumpy, rough, dry skin. So vitamin A deficiency, the early symptoms would be burning, itching, inflammation of the eyes, reduced vision, and then what's called Bitot spots, where you get these white foamy patches on the white of the eye and buildup of cellular debris, and you can kind of see it right here on this eye. And then we talked about xerophthalmia, prolonged severe deficiencies of vitamin A, and then the cornea gets dry and ulcerated, and tear glands dry up, and the eye becomes very inflamed, and then can lead to blindness. And of course, one of the things about this is that there's a lot of effort to fortify sugar, margarine, MSG with levels of vitamin A so that this disease doesn't occur. So carotenoids help in what's called age-related macular degeneration. And what happens in macular degeneration is you have changes in the macular area of the retina of the eye, and this causes blindness mainly among older adults. Now, there are some studies that say that macular degeneration is purely genetic and that nutrition does not affect it, and you're going to get it if you're going to get it. Other studies have said that there is a possibility that nutrition may accelerate this genetic issue. So what happens is you have lower levels of carotenoid in the diet, and it increases your risk of macular degeneration. So eating more green leafy vegetables as a source of lutein would be very helpful. With macular degeneration, one of the things that happens is the person gets very blurry vision in the center of their field of view. And that's because when you look at the retina of the eye, here's the optic nerve here. All these things are blood vessels. And then you have this area called the macula. And right in the middle of the macula is what's referred to as the fovea centralis. Now, in macular degeneration, what you're going to have is you're going to have these retinal hemorrhages occurring. And those retinal hemorrhages happen right by the macula, and it causes the macula to literally become destroyed. If the hemorrhages aren't stopped, eventually they get bigger and bigger, and the entire retina is destroyed, and the person can become completely blind from this. In order to stop macular degeneration once it's already started, one of the things that can be done now is that the person actually gets medication that will stop the hemorrhaging, and how that medication is given to them is directly through the eye. And so the ophthalmologist will put little drops in their eye to dilate the pupils, and then once the pupils are huge, then what they do is they take a needle and they put that needle right through the pupil of the eye, and they squirt that medicine back into the retina area, the posterior chamber of the eye. Luckily, when the pupils are that dilated, your patient is literally blind and they can't see that needle coming. So some of the risks, of course, are genetics. We talked about age, and then smoking increase the risk. And the macula contains carotenoids such as lutein and zeaxanthin, and high intake of carotenoids in the form of fruits and vegetables is associated with lower risk and could also reduce your risk of cataracts. So there is stunted growth with vitamin A deficiency, and that's because vitamin A also helps in maturation and differentiation during fetal development. So when you have an egg that's been fertilized by that sperm, and you look at that now fertilized cell, that cell doesn't actually look like anything except a cell. Eventually that cell's going to divide and divide and divide and divide, and you get this ball of hundreds of cells. And some of those cells are going to turn into cells that produce the heart, and other cells are going to become cells that produce the brain and the spinal cord. And those cells continue to turn into cells that grow a human. When those cells turn into something like a muscle cell, a brain cell, and so on, we say that those cells have differentiated. So vitamin A is necessary for those cells to be able to turn into cells that produce a human. So vitamin A is also needed for bone remodeling and growth. It binds to DNA to increase protein synthesis, and deficiency in this obviously can stop or halt child development. And most often we see this in areas where there's very poor nutrition. One of the other things too is that vitamin A is necessary for good sperm production and to help with a normal reproductive cycle in women. So vitamin A deficiency is going to increase your susceptibility to infections, mostly because epithelial cells in these areas dry out. And when that happens, it makes you more susceptible to bacteria being able to get through the cracks, you might say. Digestive juice secretion is restricted, and that increases your ability for intestinal infections. And then you can have problems inside the mouth. So for instance, impaired healing. And then because the immune system is not as strong, you have candida in the mouth anyway. This increases your risk of candidiasis. And then dry mouth also increases your risk of cavities because saliva is constantly washing away bacteria and excess acids that the bacteria produce in your mouth. And then it can decrease your sensitivity to taste. So cardiovascular disease prevention, interestingly enough, carotenoids may inhibit oxidation of low-density lipoproteins. Now, when low-density lipoproteins are oxidized, we talked about this before, it increases the risk of atherosclerosis. So if you decrease oxidation, you decrease the risk of atherosclerosis. So they say to consume at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day to reduce cardiovascular risk. Now, we talked about vitamin A deficiency, but what about vitamin A toxicity? This can cause changes to your vision, increase in what we call bone pain, liver damage, pressure on the brain. Now, this is if you're taking more than 25,000 units per day for more than 6 years, or 100,000 units for more than 6 months, and that is a lot of vitamin A. The early signs: dry lips, scaly skin, peeling on the palms of your hands, soles of your feet, hair loss, that hyperkeratosis, hyperpigmentation. I'll show you some information about hyperpigmentation. A single dose of 300,000 units can cause acute toxicity, and you basically have the same thing with the scaly skin and the mouth. Infants, nausea, vomiting, drowsiness. Same thing with adults, but include headaches in that as well, and irritability. Too much vitamin A in pregnancy is linked to poor outcomes. It's very dangerous, especially in the early stages of pregnancy, where it can change DNA and you have malformations and miscarriage. You want to make sure you're not taking too much like cod liver oil or fish oil pills, because that contains a lot of vitamin A. Now, this is too much beta-carotene, and you can see this. We get beta-carotene in carrots, and that's what gives them like that orangish color. You have too much beta-carotene, and you turn orange as well. You can also have deficiencies in many different enzymes in the body also. Too much beta-carotene is typically not toxic. You usually can get rid of that out of the body pretty well. And it does kind of look a little bit like jaundice. But if you have a lot of beta-carotene, you really look like a carrot on the outside. I had a friend who thought that a carrot diet was the way to go, and so she ate nothing but carrots, and she looked like a carrot after a while. So a large intake of vitamin A over a long period of time, like fish oil supplements, this is where you're going to get that bone and muscle pain, loss of appetite, skin disorders, headache, dry skin, hair loss, increased liver size, vomiting, possibly permanent damage, but this, again, is going to take a lot of vitamin A. Now, cancer and vitamin A. Remember, vitamin A helps with our immune system. It plays a role as an antioxidant. And so vitamin A may be able to help to decrease your risk of certain types of cancers. So a diet rich in the provitamin form, or the carotenoids, is associated with a lower risk of skin, lung, bladder, or breast cancer. Lycopene is that red pigment you get in like tomatoes and watermelons, and that seems to protect especially against prostate cancer. So prostate cancer, one of the most common forms of cancer in North America. So vitamin, this pre-vitamin lycopene may help to prevent this prostate cancer. By the way, this is just a list of the amounts of vitamin A in various different foods.